Does this work? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, especially given this less than great weather that we're having today and this week. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gabby Tang, and I'm the Director of Community for SheSharp. And
my name is Anita in SheSharp, and I'm part of the Digital Ethics and Responsibility team from I.D.E.A.
Okay, so to kick off today's event, which is building inclusive technology for a diverse society, I'd like to tell you a little bit about SheSharp, and we'll tell you a bit about Inca and IKEA before diving into our very exciting agenda of different speakers today. So SheSharp is a non-profit organisation based in the Netherlands. Our mission is to make it easier for women and non-binary people to enter, stay, and grow in the tech industry. We have been around for about 6 years now, and we do everything from events. In the last few years, we switched to online events. In fact, this is our first in-person event back after a few years, so we're very excited about this. Yeah, that's definitely worth it. Yeah. We also do a lot of engagement these days, especially through our Slack channel. It's a very active community of about 300 people globally now, which is fantastic. We have education, so we do everything. We run hackathons, we have all kinds of, a lot of our events tend to be educational, and also there's just an element of peer collaboration and education that comes from our community. And empowerment, and that's a large part of what we do. What's really important to us is building up a community for women and non-binary people to feel safe in and to enable each other to be the best that we can be. So just a few stats on what we do and who we are. So on average, pre-pandemic, we had about 100 people on average attending our events, and we had a massive range of them partnering with people, great partners like IKEA. We run at least 12 events per year. At the moment, like I said, we've been mostly doing online ones, but we're really transitioning back into in-person ones or hybrid events. We have over 1,600 members across our meetup channels and socials and Slack. And yes, quite a high social media following. So what we could see is from the beginning that there was a need for an organisation like SheSharp. And given our group is based in the Netherlands, that's where we're focusing right now. But in the last few years, we really have seen our community grow globally. And one of our biggest initiatives right now that we're running is the Mentorship Program. And I've seen a number of people from all over the world join in, from Nigeria to the US, New Zealand. We're really excited to be able to provide this platform for women and non-binary people worldwide to feel like they can feel more connected and have the ability to grow in the industry that is tech. Just a few things. You can look at our website, shesharp.co, if you want to have all those links. And just quickly, this is our team. We've got a few people here today. Sarah and Jeanette are in the front row. So we've got Amanda, Sarah, Christina, Alex, Jeanette, Tessa, and Ada, and we make up the team. We are all volunteers. This is something we do outside of our full-time jobs, but it's something that we all really care very passionately about. And now I'll hand it over to Annie.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And thank you so much for sharing the great story about SheSharp. And yeah, I think we'll just... yeah, I think that's much better. Yeah. First of all, welcome, and thank you so much for coming over here all the way in the beautiful Dutch weather. Wasn't very favorable for today's event, I must say. So we tried to do our best. So and we will keep trying to do our best in the whole event to make it keep you engaged and warm, and keep you on your toes to really listen and be interactive in the whole conversation. So we are here, and of course, as I mentioned, I'm part of IKEA, or Inca to be specific, the retail, one of the main franchisee of IKEA. So we represent together, of course, IKEA as a brand. So our vision, as you all know, we all have one of the IKEA products, at least in our home. So that's our vision, right? So we create a better life for every day for the many people. And that's where the value alignment, at least for me personally, comes in. And I believe that we all are here for a topic that also resonates with all of us, and we are curious and passionate about the same topic, which is inclusion, diversity, and equity in general, but also how does it look like in the technical world, in the digital world? And that's exactly what we are going to talk about in the coming hours. Please stay with us, and we have very interesting panel discussion coming up as well after a very interesting presentation session. So a brief background on why we are here. So first of all, I would like to thank you, SheSharp, for really partnering up and making this happen. And I have been personally involved with SheSharp in the mentoring program for the last couple of years, and which has been an amazing experience to really meet amazing people. And I can see my mentees here. Thank you so much for showing up, coming here. And growing together, learning, and this has been an amazing experience, and also giving back what I have been experienced and to the other people as well. So this is definitely, keep it up. I really like it. And saying that, also that's why I'm now currently part of IDEA in the Digital Ethics and Responsible AI team. And as a team, we are also going to address similar topic. How do we bring in the human centricity in the technology in the era where we talk about a lot of digital technology and also algorithm, and in terms of AI as well. So what does it mean? How do we really become and talk about it and be human-centric when we want to use algorithm to do a lot of stuff? So we are going to decipher all these topics, and we have amazing speakers. And please feel free to ask questions anytime that you need. So saying that, we would probably like to now introduce our speakers. We should probably shut up and just give mic to the real people. So would you like to introduce our first speaker?
Is Francesco joining us?
Yeah, yes. We have a guest, a very secret speaker, Francesco, who happens to be here this week.
No.
Wrong path. Here I am. Hello, everyone.
Great entrance. That's a great entrance. Yes. So Francesco would like to give us some introduction around why this is important, and why do you think it's important for all of us and for IKEA as well.
Very good. Check of the microphone to avoid to scare the room. Very good. So big welcome also from my side. Big thanks actually for having me. I think it's fair to say that it's a privilege for me, and it's also a very humbling inspiration, the work that you do at SheSharp, knowing that there is a lot of voluntary initiative and work around this topic. It's a topic that is really close to my heart, and I will share actually in a few minutes why I think it's super important to us as INCA. It's important to us as key actors in society, and it's also important to me personally. Let me start first by telling you welcome also in this venue. For those of you that don't know, this is the digital hub of INCA in the Netherlands. So this is where many talented colleagues of mine are key actors in our business transformation, the biggest transformation, I would say, in the history of INCA. Overall, I'm Francesco Marsoni, and I am the data analytics manager, actually, of INCA Group, which means, together with again many talented colleagues, I'm driving the continuum of the capability development of INCA across data analytics, artificial intelligence, and if I need to say why I'm very thankful for the effort and for this type of event, I ultimately believe that a more data-literate society is a more resilient society. What does that mean? It means that both for planned challenges, like tackling the climate challenge that we all know about, or tackling unplanned challenges, like the ones that we are just coming out of with the pandemic, Being resilient means, and I think COVID actually proved that to us as well, means having actors coming together in society. Coming together today means a lot exchanging data, partnering around technology to tackle challenges that are imminent and in front of us. And I think doing that through diverse and inclusive team is the only way that I do know to improve how you do something. Now, with that in mind, I really want to now spend a few words on why that's also so important to Inca. Inca has been building over the past 8 years a very strong business with the mission of creating a better life at home for the many people. That goal has been realized until now with one single constant, which is not the product, is not the icon of the brand, is the core set of values, culture, and purpose that inspire the company throughout. If you really analyze the history of the company, that's really the one constant thing. All the rest somehow evolved over time. So we made a very deliberate investment as Inca in saying now we want to take that constant of values, culture, and purpose-inspired goals into our business transformation, into our digital transformation journey, or like we like to call it, digital renovation journey, because it's ultimately about positive impact of the transformation. And in order to do that, talking about human technology, talking about human-centric decision-making, powered by data through diverse and inclusive team is one of our mission. And that's why Ani and the team are also having a very clear mission in the company, together with all our colleagues across digital, to bring those values, culture, and purpose in our digital transformation journey. So with that, I really wish you a great event. I wish you to learn from all the presenters and all the speakers that we will have. I wish you to challenge each other, because this is a difficult topic. It's a topic that is also relatively, I would say, new to the industry in terms of how we tackle some of the newest challenges, especially when we talk about topics like algorithmic accountability in decision-making, rather than all the new technology that come up at the speed of light, which means challenging each other is also a great way to shape then how the whole industry and the whole society at large will manage this landscape in the future. So big thanks again, and enjoy a good evening. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Francesco. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here and speaking about your vision and why it's important. So thank you so much. So indeed, IKEA has been a very value-driven and purpose-driven company, and what Francesco also mentioned, we are here in one of the digital hubs among 6 that we have worldwide right now. And I think we started in 2020, end of 2020, and we are growing. So right now we have, I think, over 400 co-workers here who are working towards the vision that we are aiming for as together with collaboratively with Inca collectively. And there are multiple job disciplines, job families that we are talking about, that we have data and analytics, which I'm personally part of, but we also have massive product engineering and UX team as well. So this kind of creates us where we are here. So welcoming once again, and I think we will now start the presentation, and I'll hand over the mic to Gabby.
Thanks, Annie. Actually, I have to say I was really excited to hear that IKEA was opening up a digital hub here and expanding your digital space. I'm a long-time fan of IKEA. I used to really get very excited about the catalogs appearing in my mail. It's a while ago. So personally very excited. So yeah, as Annie said, we want to kick off. I'm personally just very excited about this topic. I think with the work and the more that I understand about this space, I think being a woman in tech means that I'm just inherently interested in the topic. The more I meet other people and I become more aware of situations, But it's become much bigger than that. I realize, as Francesco was talking about, that this is actually a much bigger issue when it's related to trying to create a sustainable society. We are more and more relying on technology worldwide to do basically everything, actually. And so if the groups of people who are involved in building it and developing and designing all these products aren't taking into consideration all of our needs, then that really could cause problems down the line, or right now, in fact. And we're seeing that. And although we are looking more and more to data to be driving our decisions in an effort to remove that bias, we know for certain that that isn't always the case. It's not happening naturally. So I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker today, who knows even more about this topic, Nozha Boujemaa, who is Global Vice President of Digital Ethics and Responsible AI at IKEA. So Nozha, please come forward. We're very excited to have you.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So I will speak in a bit about my journey in this human-centric technology landscape, which is very rich, and all the previous, in fact, speakers stress the importance of this domain to make technology development and deployment sustainable. Otherwise, in fact, if there is no human centricity, there is no trust, and there is no adoption. So, few words about myself, in fact, about my journey in this area. So my background is a data scientist, PhD in computer science, computer vision, search engines, visual information retrieval, personalization, recommendation, plenty of stuff in this area. And I was very, very techno-push person, in fact. And I was organizing competition between scientists around the world. And even I have initiated one of the benchmark campaign of NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, about, for example, video copy detection. And so a lot of techno-push stuff in my early steps in my career, let's say the first 20 years, because in fact I am maybe the oldest here. So in fact, one of the lessons learned across, this techno-push path is that even within the benchmark campaign, in fact, the first-ranked techs, in fact, and approaches and models and approaches were not the best in the market, and vice versa. There are services who are very, in fact, who meet a lot of success from the market perspective, and they are performing not very well, I should say. Even there are some successful companies who don't even would like to participate in any benchmarking campaign. So, in fact, it makes you thinking a lot about what's the success at the end, in fact. How you can impact people's life. It is really through market. It's not only developing whatever very, very, let's say, very well-ranked tech, very, very Sioux, let's say, approaches, but at the end it still remain on the roof, not used, and there is no socio-economic impact. So, from this experience, I was more and more committed to interdisciplinary approaches of AI, meaning it's the only way to make, in fact, impact on people in society and the planet. And that's how I started my journey in the Trustworthy AI domain, Responsible AI, and that's how I set up an interdisciplinary institute of AI with quite a number of people, a lot of people, working in this direction with this commitment to the interdisciplinary AI approaches. When I say AI, in fact, algorithmic decision making. And that's how, in fact, the European Commission was asking me to co-chair the high-level expert group in AI to deliver the ethical guideline for trustworthy AI. At the same time, OECD asked me the same thing. Nozha, can you co-chair the expert group on AI to deliver the trustworthy AI of the OECD? Yes, of course. That's how, in fact, there is some alignment between the EU and the OECD, which is very interesting. And at the same time, the OECD principles on AI has been adopted by G20 in June 2019. So, in fact, since then, in fact, there is, in fact, a movement that have been, I'm moving too fast here. There was a movement here at the international level about trustworthy AI, what does it mean? And in fact, as we have, and we know because we are in digital hub here, that data and algorithms are driving a lot of our digital business. Not only digital business, but in fact, all dimensions of our lives today. There is a lot of, in fact, digital services, data, algorithmic decision-making, etc., etc. And then, okay, there is an issue. Once we have this big deployment of data and algorithm, okay, how to make it human-centric? Okay, then we need to build trust. And that's how trustworthy AI and responsible AI rises, because there was a very important, in fact, commitment of the international community to say, we need human-centric AI. So trustworthy AI movement rise from, yes, we need human-centric approach to AI. So these are, I will not go into much detail here, the different dimension, in fact, of trustworthy AI that have been developed around the globe, let's say, because there is now a lot of, in fact, appropriation of this dimension of trustworthy AI. I told you it started with, I don't know if there is a point. No, it's not a pointer. Yes, no, okay. It started with the European Commission and then with the OECD, and very recently, because it was in 2021, the UNESCO adopted a recommendation over more than 195 countries about these trustworthy AI principles, which is again the answer of the community to how to make AI human-centric. So that's why in the human-centric technology there are plenty of dimensions. I'm just tackling the AI aspect in the centricity here, human centricity. So, yeah, my mission at INCA and the team very recently built with Annie, with Pratt, with Tanya, with Janice and Abdo, very dynamic team and very diverse from all perspectives, in fact, backgrounds, etc., is really to bring these values of INCA, our INCA values, to life, meaning, of course, we are not the only one to make it happen, of course, but the trustworthy AI principles, since 3 years now, or even more than 3 years, there's only principles that are, okay, plenty of companies, plenty of government, plenty of all what we can find are only principles. There is no action, there is no tangible, implementation. So it was a great opportunity that INCA asked me to join, in fact, to make it tangible and to drive in a collective movement, in fact, all INCA co-workers to make it happen and to make the use of data and algorithm not only responsible but also beneficial. Most of the time in the ethical AI, we forget about the beneficial aspect. Most of the time we are talking about harm. But in trustworthy AI, there is also the beneficial dimension. We need always to remind ourselves that we need this 2 dimension. Now, of course, trustworthy AI is not sufficient to say, trust our brand, whatever, is it INCA or is it another company? What we need here, what is tangible, is to provide the proof of trust. Really, it's very important to, in fact, to catch. And again, now the international community, from NIST, from OECD, from plenty of other, in fact, international ecosystem. Now there is a lot of push on how to build the proof of trust, meaning how to make it measurable. I know not everything is measurable, but there is room for measurability. Let's do it. Okay? And that's how our starting point at INCA is our digital ethics policy, INCA Group digital ethics policy, which is our guiding lights. And it is available, and it is aligned with these, of course, international norms, mainly to establish trustworthiness in data and algorithm, put people first to enable informed human-centric decisions, which is very important. From the transparency perspective, if humans need to take decisions, they need to be informed. And most importantly, one of the critical success criteria is the literacy inside the company. To build this internal digital ethics culture is really a critical success factor. I stop here, and thank you very much for your feel free later. In the panel, a few of my team members will be present, but also they are around. If you have any question, don't hesitate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nozha. That was very interesting, and very happy to hear that IKEA is taking such a strong stance on this area. All right, up next, we will have time? Okay, I was about to adjust. That's great. All right, excellent. We have Tai Wang-Jones here today. Tai is the Global Head of Digital Inclusive Design, Equity and Accessibility Center of Expertise, which I believe you developed from scratch. If that's right, it's amazing, and has had about 20 years of experience in the inclusive space. So, very excited to hear what you have to say. Thanks, Tai.
Great, thank you. Testing, am I on? Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And today I'm here to talk to you about what is inclusive design and accessibility. So first, let's start with some definitions. And I'm going to start with accessibility, which is often shorthanded A11Y. And the reason that is because there's 11 letters in between the A and the Y. And it looks like the word ally to symbolize, look, we need people who are willing to take action to champion more equity in the world. And accessibility itself is around how do we create more access for people with disabilities in terms of the reach of services to technology and all of that. And it's specifically about one dimension of human diversity, our different abilities. Whereas inclusive design is the bigger umbrella, the bigger pie that looks at inclusion of all different types of backgrounds and stages of life. So you see here I've listed 6 dimensions, but of course there's many infinite dimensions of how we differ. But the reason I'm listing this is to show, of course, that all of these dimensions of who we are intersect with each other and the context to create unique perspectives and unique experiences that we have in the digital space, and of course analog as well. And I have to say, talk a little bit about why is inclusion important for everyone. Because I've been in the inclusion space for 20 years now, coming in 2023, and the reality is that this topic, it can be a sexy topic, right? Nobody's going to be the asshole, to say that, hey, I don't care about inclusion. But it is also seen as a really fluffy topic that a lot of people can't put, their grasp their hands around. So it's important for us to see what is the tangible impact around inclusion. And that really brings me back to humanity and how we evolved and developed as a whole. And the reality is that we've survived as a social species, and part of that is because we've developed our acute ability to connect with our emotions, to be able to connect with one another. And in the world in our evolution, that's really helped us to thrive as a species. And in the world of technology, that also has been a challenge. Technology has brought us closer together, but in ways also pulled us apart. And in fact, there's a lot of exclusion that's happening in the world, in a technological space, a lot of inequities that's happening. So how do we close that gap? And in fact, we know from research with the many fields, and especially in neuroscience, we see that actually exclusion and loneliness creates the kind of pain and activates the same kind of pain receptors in the brain as one would with physical pain. And we see that people who are chronically lonely and have been excluded actually have a 45% chance of dying earlier in life. And we also see infant babies that have been orphaned and have been given shelter and food and water, but not love and affection and touch. In fact, have a concept around failure to thrive, that they would actually die from that experience without the kind of intimacy that we as humans need. And unfortunately, in our modern world, we've been told, let's not be emotional and only operate on intellect. But the problem is the only people who operate on intellect alone without emotions are psychopaths. And that is not something we should aim to be. And in fact, in order to create a meaningful world where we're going to make a difference, we have to lean on our compassion, right, to be able to really connect to the humanity of who we are to make a difference in the world. And what do we mean by digital exclusion? I do want to give some examples starting from the right to the left. First, how many left-handers are in here? Yeah, there's always bound to be, yes. And I would venture to guess your experiences in the world are just that much more frustrating because products are not designed, right, for you. Absolutely. And that's the reality in technology as well. Most of our physical technology, the hardware and the software, is typically developed for the dominant population, the target group of right-handers, and that creates a lot of frustration for lefties. We know of the experience of creating also facial recognition technology that was created in Silicon Valley, mostly by young white males that tested the technology with one another. But when that hit the market, we realized how much impact that it had when it comes to underrepresented communities, especially if we looked at the intersection of race and gender. And in fact, Black females, this was 32% less effective for this particular group, and also less effective, around 20% for people with smaller eyes. So this really speaks to how do we engage with the populations, how do we co-create with populations that are diverse so that we can create better products. When it comes to the world of HR, there's all kinds of technologies that's being built to reduce bias. Unfortunately, some of that also backfired. So Amazon a few years back looked at creating algorithms to predict hiring, and they used their data, or their own database, which is quite skewed to males, and that created a problem with basically leaving out all the female applicants. So these kinds of things have impact because of the data that we're using and the algorithms that we're using. And similarly, ads we see tend to nudge with dark patterns to create less favorable conditions, say, for people who are in low social and economic status, to nudge them to take on loans or credit cards that are higher interest and where they're more likely to default on. So these are reasons of why which we need to intentionally bring down biases in technology, and how do we really increase inclusion in a digital space. So then what do we mean by inclusive solutions? So everything pictured here is actually was originally created or inspired by people with disabilities, and now something we use, every one of us. So starting with what's pictured in the typewriter, right? So this, of course, now is our keyboard that we use every day. But the prototype was originally created by a man who was in love with a blind woman. He wanted to write love letters to her, but he couldn't in a private way because she had to have someone dictate to him. So he created this device so that she can write love letters to him all on her own. So Alexander Graham Bell, in creating the telephone, actually said that his lifelong support and inspiration from the deaf community was what actually drove him to create this technology, ironically. We see, right, look, closed captioning, text messaging, speech to text, text to speech, all of these things were created for a small, or what we think is a small segment of the world, but now we use it every day without noticing. OneNote created for people with learning disabilities. That's why you have all these features to help you. Actually toothbrushes for those with mobility problems, right? So really think about how we can really scale this up in a way that benefits all. And that brings me to the concept of the curb effect. The curb effect comes from the diversity, equity, and inclusion world. And it's the concept that when we, in the 70s, created curbs on the sidewalks and cut those curbs, it was meant for people to be able to be more mobile on wheelchairs. But when that was created, we realized that that was helpful for everyone that was on wheels or pushing something on wheels, like a baby stroller or a shopping cart. And that's why inclusion is a win-win and not a competition. And in fact, that digital side, the curb effect also exists. If we think about a technology where you move your feet to open a trunk, that of course is helpful for someone who may be missing a limb permanently, but also someone who has an injury in the moment, like a broken arm, as well as anyone who has their arms full, right? So the stats here in terms of the numbers of people is based on US stats alone. So think about the wide impact around the world of how many who can really benefit from these technologies. I do have a video, but I'm going to look at Annie to see yes, no? Probably no, right? So
I was thinking we do have a break, half an hour break before the panel. Maybe we could just play during that time.
yes, absolutely.
I'm sure, I know that video is amazing. I think it would be great also interested people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I will end with inclusion is a win-win. So thank you, everybody. Yeah, of course.
It's got especially Soraya Hausl is Chief Data Scientist and co-founder at Carra. I'll let her introduce herself. But I want to say I met Soraya about 6 years ago when we worked together at ASOS. We were working on the platform that worked on recommendations and personalization, and even much greater understanding about the impact and how we can be using data and for ethics is around it. So, Soraya?
You. I'm currently lead data science. The Carra is a platform for and we offer expert advice, data-driven product recommendations. Yeah. More or less, our startup or our platform was actually building a new. We saw that. Is it? Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Is it better now? Perfect. Just because the textured hair space has historically been very underrepresented in the beauty care space and the hair care space, and we saw an opportunity on the market for that, and we saw the need from the users to build something that just facilitates hair care, makes it easier and enjoyable. And before Carra, I worked at Booking.com, where I was working on optimizing hotel recommendations or hotel rankings, and as Gabby mentioned before that, I was working on fashion recommendations at ASOS. Yeah, I think we already discussed a bit today that data and algorithms have a critical role in inclusive tech. So obviously this is a bit of a perpetuating cycle. If you build based on discriminatory data, we create biased AI systems. This leads to injustices in applications, and then we see the real-world implications of non-inclusive AI. And obviously, if we don't consider inclusivity in data and AI, this has severe impacts, right? So here are a few examples. Yeah, I think Ty mentioned some of these actually before already, around facial recognition. We know about Cambridge Analytica and all this discussion. There's a recent, I guess, example even in the Netherlands when we look at the benefit scandal that was also based on like a discriminatory model. And yeah, other implications like mortgage approvals or job recommendations. So what does it mean for the data scientists if we work on the data, right? So basically there's a saying that for data science models, garbage in, garbage out, and the same goes for bias, right? So obviously we have a lot of bias as we build the system, and that leads to a lot of bias coming out of the models. And the bias really can be found along the whole process of data science. So it starts with historical bias in the data, with representation bias that we see in our data sets, measurement bias as we draw the samples, and then learning biases within the models, evaluation bias, aggregation bias. So there's a lot of areas within the model building where things can go wrong. So what can we do as data scientists or data professionals? So first of all, making sure that we check the bias, that we understand the bias, right? So domain knowledge is usually key to understand what are the risks in my data, what are the potential problems. Diverse data collection, right? So usually preparing the data quality should always be a key part of the model building. Quite often it's not the most sexy part of the model building. People often want to do deep learning, fancy models, and so on, but actually making sure that the data is correct, that the data is right, and that we fill any sort of data gaps if we know that some groups are underrepresented, and enable representation of various user groups is really critical here. Ethical feature considerations, right? So anything that's around gender, race, location, income, might be useful in the model and might increase metrics like accuracy, but can be very controversial to use it. And furthermore, also other latent variables that are connected with that, right? So a popular example is, for example, in the UK, using a postcode is very similar to kind of inferring on economic status or also race, right? So also checking for these sort of latent variables and understanding how is the data connected is crucial. And then also data governance, right? Challenging assumptions, business questions, and correcting the data where needed. So when we were, for example, doing fashion recommendations at ASOS, we know that we had various user groups that were not served very well. Like, for example, people with different size requirements. We had a pregnancy line for women. So these were things that the algorithm did not really pick up well on. And then we just introduced business rules to correct it where needed. Models and algorithms, right? So I think this is also one of the examples that Ty alluded to previously. This was done as part of the gender shades study, where various facial recognition state-of-the-art algorithms were explored and benchmarked. And as you can see, the overall accuracy is quite good, right? 90% for recognizing the image and the subjects in it. But then when we dig deeper, we see the differences, right? And here we can clearly see that the model is much worse for women in general, for darker males, and for darker females especially, right? So just looking at the overall metrics can be very concerning if we want to understand how well a model performs and actually what it does to the end users. Model and algorithms can have a severe impact in terms of how we hire, how we employ, access to housing, access to insurance, access to education, credit lines, mortgages, surveillance, police involvement, and so on. So what can we do to make sure that models and algorithms are inclusive? So as was already mentioned, we should optimize intersectionally. So that means, on the one hand, make sure that the models are interpretable and transparent, right? So as algorithms become more and more advanced, there's always a bit of a challenge that we lose a bit of sight what are they actually doing, right? With models like regressions that are a bit more straightforward, it's much more easy to say what they're doing. But with like deep learning and so on, it becomes much more complex. But keeping that in view and being able to understand what the model does is key, so that we can communicate it to the rest of the organization, the business, and also keep in mind what it does to the end user. Inclusive AI testing, so that means testing with a wide set of user groups, with a wide set of end users to actually understand what happens, right? So if I'm the user, it might do something very differently for me than it does for you. And just having this sort of set of observations is very helpful. Intersectional optimization, that was already discussed earlier. Optimization is ongoing. So that means that they're involving the customer in the feedback loop, keeping track of the model evolution. What I didn't mention before, including inclusivity metrics and KPIs. So that means that we don't only, for example, have accuracy, but we look at accuracy for different subgroups. We look at other metrics like diversity. And here things like ensemble models or different models actually for different subgroups might be very helpful. And lastly, model governance. That means as the data scientist or the data professional, you most of the time know best what is happening with the model, what is happening within the model, what are the limitations, what are the risks, and these have to be communicated. And then the model development does not end with the model training, right? So then it actually starts with the deployment and the communication. And this is also an area where the data professionals or data scientists need to take responsibility. Here's a statement by Timnit Gebru, who was, I don't know, some of you might have heard it, but she was involved in Google Ethical AI, working on Google Ethical AI, and then has since left or was ousted from the company. But she also says that, refers to that that the data scientist has a responsibility. It's not only about correcting the bias, it's about practically thinking which model should we actually build, what is useful, what is the impact, and how can we ensure that it's equitable and inclusive. And in terms of deployment and communication, it's also up to the data professional to be really the director of the work and to empower the user. So first of all, consent, right? So the user should always know what is going on. When am I impacted by AI? Can I opt out? Can I steer it? Can I control it? Transparency and education, that means that elevating the voice of the user. So users should understand how the data is used and should be educated about it, right? So I think these days data literacy or understanding what is the data that is used from us in any sort of applications, social media, technology is very important for everyone, actually, not just for data professionals. Creating standards, which was also mentioned earlier. I think there was the ethical code for IKEA. And as I mentioned before already, communicating limitations and risks. So that means involving stakeholders, communicating what the model does. Bias can also creep in later, understanding what is sort of the worst impact, right? If I recommend a song, a fashion item, if it's wrong, might not be so bad. If I'm working on mortgage applications, it can severely impact the lives of people, of the end users. And inclusive AI or inclusive data is a growing topic, and there are many initiatives that are already doing great work. So definitely keep up to date with those. So there's the Algorithmic Justice League, which was also founded by Joy Buolamwini, who was related to the gender shades concept of study that I showed earlier. There is democratizing artificial intelligence research, which is from Timnit. There's various blueprints and guides out there that people can follow. Organizations like the Algorithm Watch, or also laws and regulations like the GDPR. I think anyone who works with data would have heard about that recently and would have had to adapt models, adapt processes over the last few years. And lastly, on this area, I would say speak up. So data scientists are most closely to the data, most closely to what is going on. Speaking up about that, highlighting risks is definitely crucial. Building diverse teams, so inviting diverse viewpoints into the room definitely helps, because every one of us has a very, has a biased view. Even like if I build a model, I might recognize different issues than someone else. education and mentoring for people within and outside of the data area. So the business education within the business about what is the power of AI and what are the dangers. Keeping informed, laws and regulations, initiatives, there's lots of great stuff out there, lots of things to learn from. And yeah, many initiatives and organizations are doing great work. And also on a positive note, obviously inclusive solutions are a great opportunity. So actively building them, proactively striving to creating technology and AI that serves everyone can actually be of great power, right? So we already discussed some accessibility tech. And one of the projects that came out of the Algorithmic Justice League was actually a cooperation with a beauty brand to improve facial recognitions and applications like makeup. And yeah. And lastly, how are we approaching this at Carra? So from our point of view, obviously co-creation with the user, being customer focused, human in the loop. So we work with experts, with haircare experts, and our recommendations should simplify the work of the experts or augment them and not necessarily completely replace them. Independence, so we are not dependent on a specific brand. We aim to be unbiased, always improving the data. So my main work is actually mostly building up the data set, for that collecting from various areas, from various data sets to make sure that we have a large and diverse representation, and being transparent with the user, just in terms of how do we use the data, what is happening, and keeping them informed. Yes, that's it from my side. Yeah, just with a quote from the Algorithmic Justice League. Who codes matters, how we code matters, and we can definitely use code and data to improve our lives. Thank you.
Sorry, just hold on one second. I absolutely forgot earlier about Q&A. So I'm sorry about that. We'll make time for Ty and Nozha afterwards. Before moving, does anyone have any questions for Soraya? We've got one there. I don't know if we have another microphone or something. Okay.
I think that works.
Yeah, it's basically the question that would relate to pretty much everyone who spoke before. And the question that is very similar to what the healthcare is going on today through. And you mentioned part of it today. So a big part of refining the data to be inclusive is consent of the user who gives you this data. And referring to the very first conversation, building up the trust is not the job that has been done today a mess. And so if we want to start including the data, what good patterns do you see in collecting it today from specifically marginalized groups that might not have access to technology or have the higher distrust degree? And if you have like any positive example in this respect of how to motivate people to collect the data, and what would you consider an ethical way of collecting the data? Should it be necessarily transparent, necessarily open data? What's the...
That's a good question. Long one. I would say in terms of building trust, transparency. I think just laying out how things are working, avoiding ways around that, right? So I think just being able for users to turn off any sort of personalization, turn off any models is already kind of enforcing the trust, because if my product is not dependent on that, that already helps. Do I know great examples? That's a bit of a challenging. I know a lot of bad examples, but it's definitely difficult to get it right? So, for example, I think Netflix has been historically an example where it's very difficult, actually, not difficult, but it's actually, they make it difficult to search for things, right? If you don't want to access the recommendations out of the box, right? So being able to circumvent that already helps. I think maybe Spotify is a good example in that sort of sense, that at least they feed back to the user what the data is, and actually educate the user in some sense about the data collection, right? So I've often see these sort of Spotify wrapped year-end things, and people are like, oh, that's amazing, it's true. Well, yeah, it's the data that they collect about you, right? And just kind of having this understanding of what is happening, I think already helps and makes people understand. I don't know if I answered all of your questions. Okay, well, we can continue later.
Yeah, you'd like to to also, yeah, indeed. In fact, you mentioned healthcare, very nice example. I was previously in healthcare industry. This industry is really regulated, like finance. There is a lot of risk in these two industries. Now, technology is on the way to be regulated. There is the AI Act, which is a draft regulation circulating already. It is European for now, but a lot of other, in fact, countries are adopting the same way, which is risk-based AI regulation. And when we talk about risk-based AI regulation, meaning exactly how do we know, I mean, it's, believe us, we have trustworthy recommendation. Okay, good, enough, but how fair is it, in fact? That's why I was talking about measurability. So in this draft regulation, because a lot of people agree that this technology needs to be regulated, even though we can agree, we cannot agree, of course. But in this draft regulation, there is conformity assessment, meaning we need traceability, we need interpretability. We need to understand what's going on. What is the use of data in a measurable way, and how far algorithms are using the data and how. And also algorithm, indeed, there is, in fact, risk detection in terms of bias, in terms of, there is plenty of risk dimension, and indeed, today there is, at the international level, at the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States, together with the OECD, work on how to identify, how to detect the risk, how to assess it, and how to, I would not say mitigate it, but at least manage it. Because it's very, very difficult to mitigate the risk, which you are talking about. But it is getting the same way as the health tech, in fact, way, regulation.
Any more questions?
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Soraya. It was very informative. There's a lot of actionable steps that I took out of that, even not working in data, actually. Just knowing that, I find fascinating. Okay, and our final speaker, very excited to have us have Emily Lowe join us. Emily is Director of Data at MoonPay, and also really special to us because she is one of the founding members of SheSharp. So thanks, Em.
That's it? Thank you. Oh, it works. Great. Thank you. Yeah, okay. This is great. All right, I'm going to take the conversation a little left, a little bit differently. I work for MoonPay. We are a on-ramps provider for cryptocurrencies. I used to work at Coinbase, which I think some of you are probably familiar with. It's a cryptocurrency exchange. I'm taking this angle from, I'm just taking a slightly different angle from the speakers previous, talking about technology itself as being the democratizing factor, specifically blockchain and Web3. I think some of the things I'm going to go through are not quite as applicable today, probably, but we're talking about a futuristic world here, and also the potential of where we can possibly go with this kind of technology. So I think there's, is anyone here, first of all, in crypto or involved? A couple of people, okay. Here and there, great. All right, so you probably see some of the familiar concepts here. So it's just a brief primer on Bitcoin and blockchain technology, first of all. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is or what it can do. Currently, agreed, there's a lot of crypto bros out there. It's really not inclusive at all. It's very much about investing, it's about money, it's about a lot of things that people, aren't, it doesn't really, necessarily kind of lend itself to being lumped in with something like inclusivity and diversity. However, let me go through the technology and then I'll talk about exactly how this can shape up into something that could be really powerful for all of us involved, not only in the modern world, but for the global and for the future in general. So, what is Bitcoin exactly? It's basically digital money. I think all of you are familiar with that in some sense or another. And what is it? It's decentralized, so nobody owns owns Bitcoin in and of itself. So for example, like when we talk about the US dollar, who owns the US dollar? The US government, right? Euro, who owns the euro? The EU, et cetera, et cetera. Every kind of currency that we deal with today is owned by some institution or government and is run by them. So for example, with inflation, as we've all experienced, I'm sure, who sets those rates? Who sets those rates? It's the government. But it's different for Bitcoin because nobody actually controls it. You can mine it, you can trade it, you can buy it, you can deal with it. But who owns it? Nobody actually owns it. So it's completely decentralized. You can send it to technically anybody without any third party involved. You only have to have a wallet address. You can have types of wallets that you own entirely, or you can have ones that are hosted by others, but that's a whole different thing. The point is that nobody technically owns it, and everybody who's involved with it has this little piece of it. That's literally the concept. So blockchain is a technology where Bitcoin transactions are enacted. So what is a blockchain exactly? For our intents and purposes, it's a sort of ledger. So it's basically a record, of where everyone has been buying, selling, again, trading, et cetera, and it all happens on the blockchain. It's all anonymous in the sense that you don't attach your name. So I'm not like Emily Lowe, I bought X number of Bitcoin on X date at this time. It's wallet number, hash that's like 26 characters long at least, and then I have entered this into the ledger, and it's been validated by all the other people who are a part of that network, and therefore it can never be disputed essentially. And that's the last point here, exactly right. So blockchains are distributed across an entire network, so nobody hosts it. So the internet, for example, we think of it as a really open public thing, but actually it's hosted by certain companies and certain people. But in this case, and let's think about like when you send money. Has anyone sent money abroad? Yeah, how hard was it on a scale of 10? Just yell it out. Yeah, okay, exactly. So the concept of this is basically on the blockchain, you're able to just kind of send something, instantly, and they'll receive it without anyone having to say like, that will cost you 5% more, or X% more, or $30, even though you want to send $30, etc. So that's a concept, again, with blockchain. So decentralized, over a network, so distributed over a wide, over everybody who's involved, and everyone who participates in this network, we call it a protocol. So you agree to be part of the protocol if you buy into the network, essentially. So I just have a couple like tables here, for example, just to give more info on exactly why this is important. But let's go back to, for example, other currency. Yeah, so governments issue it. It's primarily based on a value of currency in general is based on confidence that the government issues it. It's secured by third parties like banks and governments. Nobody else. There are physical bills and coins with normal money and so forth. So let's extend it to Web3 because I'm sure people have heard about this. Who has not heard of Web3? That's a question. No? You've never heard of Web3? Okay, that's fine. So Web3 is basically a concept that was based in the cryptocurrency world. It's an extension mainly of the blockchain. It actually has nothing to do with Bitcoin in and of itself. So the thing with cryptocurrency is that Bitcoin is just one of many cryptocurrencies. There are a lot of tokens out there, and every time one comes up, the reason why it does is because it has its own blockchain. So again, with protocols and so forth, you volunteer, essentially, when you buy a token of that nature to participate in that network. So Web3 is an extension of that concept. Basically, it's a decentralized online ecosystem based on the blockchain. So to explain this a little bit more, let's go through Web 1 and Web 2. We're currently in Web 2. Web 1 was like, I don't know how old people are here, but I'm like, wait, like old days where you had dial-up, you could only have like 5 websites out there, or like a GeoCities. I don't know if that really ages me, but like you built your own website, and it was also hosted, just like a handful of things that you could access. It was mostly read-only, right? Like it was mostly like consuming things. You could search for things, of course, you could interact in that sense, but no one was really making making things aside from the few companies that were hosting the websites. So for example, like eBay, I think like Netscape and so forth, there were a couple things here and there. I think most news sites had some content out there, but there was no sort of interaction. Okay, so the Web 2 is where we're at right now. This is the dawn of social media, where basically you're consuming, but you're also creating. We're creating though, and who here is on social media? Just as a question. Right, okay. And so again, like you're engaging, so not only do you post, you also see and so forth. However, who owns that data? The platform, exactly. You do not own your own content. That is not yours when you put on Facebook, when you put on Instagram, that's theirs. And you have just given it to them. But that's also the kind of contract we had with them, right? Like with Web 2, we're like, cool. With Facebook, for example, we all were like, yeah, let's sign up. I want to be on Facebook. All my friends are on Facebook. And then you upload all your photos and you're like, wait, they're no longer my photos. It's out there in the ether. They can use it for whatever they want and so forth. And that's also part of what some of the talks were before, right? The ownership of data is super important. And that is part of the nefariousness, because when it came out with the Cambridge Analytica for Facebook, right, part of the problem was they had, to some extent, full license to do whatever they wanted with that data. Is it ethical? Definitely not. But at the same time, we as the users, we, to some extent, volunteered up our information for them to use. And so there's a problem that's even bigger than us being involved in trying to figure out, in our world, how are we supposed to create human-centric technology? Like, technology in and of itself, as we know it today, is fundamentally biased. We cannot participate in a truly decentralized world because everything's owned by 5 companies out there, basically FANG, right? Like Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Netflix, and well, basically Amazon. I think they own literally everything. But in that case, that's why Web3 has come up. And of course, this is a bit of a far from reality. So even my picture of Web3 here is actually just Web2. Let me be real. Because the photo of Web3, or the concept of Web3, isn't really in it's not really come into fruition in its totality just yet. However, the concept is very, very interesting. So basically what we want to do in Web3 is basically consume, create, but also own the content that you're creating. And that's why NFTs are so popular. Yes, I know they're all just JPEGs of apes and whatever, but actually the concept of NFTs are super important, and it extends into Web3. For example, if you're an artist, who here is in art or an artist of some kind, creator? Great. How difficult is it to sell your art? Yeah, see. Yeah, the art world is extremely closed off. It's also been owned by a few small parties, actually, in the world, also throughout history. Art history has been, they used to have patrons, really, really rich people who funded artists to do things for them. And the artists didn't really own what they created. It was always owned by somebody else. So now we're entering a world, basically, where technology, blockchain technology, is allowing us to buy into our own protocols of our choice, buy into the networks of our own choice, and also create the communities that serve us for our needs. And therefore, we are able to serve all the diversity, all the diverse kind of characteristics of our entire world, cater to different subjectivities and so forth, and be able to kind of think of technology as enabling that kind of connection between humans, as opposed to necessarily playing in this world that we currently have. So yeah, this is basically my thesis, essentially. Blockchain is inherently inclusive technology. It is being used currently, indeed, for very specific things, such as, indeed, Bitcoin. And indeed, I do totally admit that crypto world is a little bit closed off right now, and we are pretty much, we're quite far from probably the absolute manifestation and the potential of what this actually means for us. However, it does facilitate agency, and it does facilitate ownership of our own data. So who here has heard of Brave Coin or Brave Browser? Yeah, great. And what's the concept? Can someone tell me? Just say it out loud. Yeah, you stay private, and you also have a token in which you can kind of, you can basically volunteer to have ads, you can pay to have ads shown to you, essentially. And that is kind of like a paid Facebook, right? Because in Facebook and in Web 2, we are the product. You are the ones being sold, essentially. You, again, it's a concept of ownership. You don't own your data. You have no power over it. You have no power over how it's being used. You have power over what's being shown to you and so forth. However, in the Brave browser, essentially you use a token and you basically say, okay, I want to be shown these different things. I will willingly pay for those things. And they, in turn, companies will say, okay, great, they want to come for my products, so I'm going to show them because they're paying me directly. So there's a bit of more of a mutual kind of relationship as opposed to the way that Facebook and Google do it, where there's, again, an algorithm that decides for you, whether you should be shown certain things or not. And so, yeah, basically at the end of the day, almost everything in the world and in history has always been governed by a handful of powerful bodies. And that has been, in a lot of ways, unethical, right? Like in some ways, like where do you have empowerment truly when you are in some ways always participating in a world that is determined by other people? And blockchain technology essentially frees us up to this possibility that we might not necessarily have to do that. Of course, like when I'm talking about time horizons, maybe in the 50 years or something like that, but basically at the end of the day, this is the future where we're not even talking about, again, accommodating for the little, not the little, I mean, they are impactful, don't get me wrong, but we're not accommodating for our day-to-day lives on a micro basis, but we're talking about the macro basis. So, yeah, that's a takeaway, basically. Yeah, that's kind of it, actually. I don't really know what to say. There's probably a lot of questions and probably a lot of arguments against this, but I'm willing to hear them, so yeah.
Thank you, Emily. Does anyone have any questions? We'll start over here, Tessa.
Cool.
Apart from like the whole Web3 part, the main issue I currently see with Web3 is the power consumption. Like, I know there is like proof of stake and proof of
work.
mining. Proof of work. And even the proof of stake, at least what I understood, didn't like cut down a lot of like the electoral use, and we already use quite a lot of energy, which isn't great for the planet as well.
True. So, I mean, that's actually one of the problems with cryptocurrency as it is currently. So there's two sides to that in some sense. So we're talking about sustainability itself. I think as we move towards like more renewable energy sources, I think that is also the answer. So, I mean, that's an easy way out in some sense. One thing about cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin actually, is that the reason why it has value, though, is because it consumes energy. And so without that consumption, there actually is no value to it. And there is a sort of double-edged sword there because, indeed, like if you lose that value, then what does it mean? At the same time, it does kind of shape it gives, we'll say, how do you say, materialist, like it makes material what is actually always the case, right? Everything costs energy, actually. And everything, even like normal currency to print money is also taking energy. But we don't frame those things in that way. But actually that is what all currency is, and that's what all value is. It is actually just energy. So it's not really an answer per se to say like, like this is not a problem per se, but I think that's, you can't separate the energy consumption part from the value that it actually has. So it's not really a solution per se, but I'm just saying, yeah, that is part and parcel of why it's important to make sure that we're moving towards like worlds that are having like sustainability in mind, but also recognizing that, yeah, at the end of the day, energy is in itself value. Does that help? Yeah? We can talk afterwards, yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, what...
Oh.
Doesn't work. Oh, yeah. What do you think about the metaverse? Is it the future of Web 3.0, or is it Web3 actually? Or is it like it has no relation with it? I don't know.
I think there is some relation to in some sense, right? If we zoom out a lot and we talk about a lot of like even when we talk about AI, right? We talk about singularity, et cetera, et cetera. I think there is a world in which the metaverse is our way towards singularity, right? Where basically what is immortality? Let's think about that, right? I think there's a theory basically where immortality is that we will no longer have our bodies, but these things will just be forever roaming in some metaverse and so forth. So I do think that there is a metaverse. Does it look like Mark Zuckerberg's? Most definitely not. And I don't think that is, the one that is going to be. I think there's going to be multiple metaverses, however, and I think that it'll be interesting to see exactly where we go with that, because I think a lot of the interest in the metaverse currently is very self-involved and very much sort of for this concept of, we should all live forever and we can, we should all proceed in that way. I don't know if I want to live forever, personally, but in that sense, that's kind of also part of what the other speakers were talking about in terms of AI, where that's going to be more important to shape the metaverse, because all that is, all the parameters of those worlds will have to be taking into all those factors into consideration in order to make sure that it's not a hell, basically, the seventh circle of hell, which it might be. Maybe you might like that. I don't know. On you. You do you. Anyone else? Go.
So one thing I find is that when we talk about blockchain and all of its benefits, one thing that's usually skipped in most discussions is the question of accountability. Mm-hmm. So if there is no governing body, then who is answerable or who is accountable when something goes wrong, and how do you reverse it? Because currently we find so many instances when if something goes wrong, there is no way to reverse it, and there have been so many people who've lost money or who've had a lot of mishaps, and there has been no way to reverse that. So is that something which is being discussed enough, or are there any thoughts on how accountability could be enforced when there is no governing body?
So in theory, the governing body as a whole, like the network in itself, should be self-governing. And that's also part of the reason why when things go wrong, there's a resistance to not going back. Because if you start to go back and not everyone agrees, then the consensual network is broken. And that's actually why, and I don't know if any of you know about like hard forks and so forth, but for example, Bitcoin, at some point, someone said like, I don't want to do it like this anymore. I want to do it this way. So they created Bitcoin Cash. But it's no longer Bitcoin then, it's Bitcoin Cash. And so I think that's, it's a tough one, because I think the accountability should actually be in itself. It should be in the network itself, and it should be in the protocol. That's why we call it a protocol in the first place. However, it's currently not perfect by any means whatsoever, and I do think that it will take some time for it to really kind of, manifest how it's actually going to end up being. What we might end up having is indeed these situations in which, and I don't know how exactly they're going to deal with this, and it has been in the crypto community a huge problem, exactly what I was saying, like Bitcoin and then Bitcoin Cash, and everyone on Bitcoin Cash is like, let's go back to that part of the ledger and we'll start all over, but then these people who are going into Bitcoin say, no, we can't do that, and then they break off, and then they have a debate over, how you're supposed to deal with that part of the ledger that you're unsure about. So that's, this is sort of, again, a bit of a non-answer. Apologies. But I do think that the theory is meant to be that it's self-governing, indeed.
Sorry, I do have a question regarding...
Yeah, we can hear you.
I do have a question about, you talked about Brave and how someone will be able to say that they want to pay for these ads to be shown to them. And right now, Facebook does it by simply seeing how you move on their app, and you come to that. Considering how things are, like the polarization of media these days, does it not end up like some of the issues that, of course, there's that people don't see enough of different perspectives would not lead to the same thing?
Yes, that's actually one of the things that I personally have a lot of problem with. So there's a guy in the crypto community called Balaji who is extremely smart, do not get me wrong, and he's very, very good at thinking about these things. His theory is that actually when any kind of body, and it's a bit it's a bit extreme for my taste, and that's also why I have a problem with it. But he's saying, okay, when third parties interfere with anything, so such as media or along the way, or institutions of that kind, it's inherently a problem because it is in some sense, in some way censorship, right? Like, who is anybody to gatekeep anything for anyone, right? So that's a theory about, and that's what Web3 is supposed to fix in some sense. But the flip side is exactly that, is that if you only choose to see what you want to see, then in what sense, are you not gatekeeping for yourself, right? So I don't really have an answer per se. I think it is a problem that we will have to sort out. And I think that's also part of what we were just talking about with accountability, is that if you decide to, the concept of Web3 is just basically a bunch of small communities, right, that you volunteer to be a part of. And I think the part of doing that, like having some kind of contract with other people within this network that is not governed by a third party, like Facebook, for example, that is supposed to, I think, again in theory, kind of mitigate those problems, because if you have a network of, let's say, 1,000 people who kind of like, okay, like we're all mostly like-minded, and okay, well, oh, you're showing me that this is actually something that you want to do, and then you're exposed to those sorts of concepts without necessarily having to have volunteered for the thing in and of itself, but just by virtue of being part of the network and part of the community, that is part of the, that is opportunity for exposure to different thoughts. Indeed. But yeah, it's not perfect. Don't get me wrong.
I think we might need to take a break, actually.
I could go for a hot dog.
If anyone has any questions, maybe Emily, if you've got some time during the break, people can come and find you. Sorry about that. Because we have been sitting for a while, and I think everyone might need a toilet or food break. I just want to say thank you very much, Emily. I think chatting to Em about what her topic could be about, and thinking about how blockchain and Web3 could be more inclusive, especially related to that idea of transparency that we talked about, that being a necessity for inclusion, was a really interesting angle. And personally, I like seeing GeoCities in there. GeoCities is the reason I got into programming. So thanks, Web 1.0. Okay, so let's take a 20-minute break. If you need toilets, I think there are some at the back, some near where the food area is. We will rejoin in about 20 minutes. Thanks, everyone.